Everyone. In this video, the focus is on two common terminologies in epidemiology: epidemic versus an outbreak. Epidemic versus an outbreak. Now, what is an epidemic in epidemiology? When we say an epidemic is when there is a sudden increase, in a disease case above what is normally expected in a particular region. So, for example, let's take for a particular condition, we usually expect, let's say, 5 cases. Then for that condition, let's say we expect 5 cases in a month. Then for a particular month, we are recording 100 cases. We can call it an epidemic condition. So the condition has now become an epidemic. Okay, a typical example is when there is a cholera surge in an entire city after, let's say, flooding has occurred. You can say there is an epidemic. Okay, another example can be when there is a spike in the occurrence of, let's say, measles across multiple districts due to low vaccination. You can also call that as an epidemic. You see, we are using across multiple districts. Okay, so there is a surge in the occurrence of cholera in an entire city, meaning across multiple districts or communities in that city. Okay, so in such a situation, you call it an epidemic. Okay, another example can be, let's say, dengue fever increase across, let's say, a country during rainy season. Is that okay? Such a situation, you can call it an epidemic. Now, what is an outbreak? When we say an outbreak is also an epidemic, but when it is localized. So when an epidemic is localized, so an outbreak is more like a localized increase in cases, usually limited to small area or a group or sometimes an institution. An example can be, let's say, food poisoning among guests at a wedding. You can't call it an epidemic. So, for example, in such a situation, still you are going to get an increase in the number of occurrence, but that one is not an epidemic because, you see, it's limited to a group of people. There is a localized increase in the numbers. So such a situation, call it an outbreak. Okay, it is not wrong when you call it an epidemic, but then it's best that you call it an outbreak. Okay, so an outbreak is more like a localized increase in cases, usually limited to a small area or a small group or an institution. Another example can be COVID-19 cluster in a single factory or a workplace. So let's say a particular workplace, all the workers over there are reporting with COVID-19 are getting infected with COVID. It's an outbreak. What is making it an outbreak? Because it is limited to that institution. Okay, it's now an outbreak. Now, another example can be, let's say, norovirus outbreak in one school dormitory or a single school dormitory. Okay, so for example, let's say a particular school in a particular district, just that single school, then people are reporting with food poisoning. Okay, it's an outbreak. You can't call it an epidemic. Is that okay? So know the difference between the two. Usually, if you want to distinguish between an epidemic and an outbreak, in epidemiology, we use these two words interchangeably sometimes, but there are differences. Outbreak is usually localized to a particular institute. Sometimes it can even be a family. An outbreak can occur and be limited to a particular family. An outbreak can occur and be limited to, let's say, wedding guests, be limited to a particular church. Maybe a church went for a program. They all ate or drank from a similar source. An outbreak of a disease have occurred, or people are getting infected by a particular disease. Call it an outbreak. But let's say we usually expect, let's say, 5 cases of, let's say, 5 cases of cholera in a particular region. Okay, then in that same region, in multiple districts, let's say district A is reporting 10 cases, district B 20 cases, district C 30, then you don't call that one an outbreak. That one is an epidemic. Why? Because it's occurring across multiple districts within a particular region. So it's an epidemic. Is that okay? Usually, if you want to look at the difference, or you want to be able to know the difference, look at the scale of occurrence. So for an epidemic, it affects a large area. So there is an increase, there is a surge in the number, a sudden increase in the number compared to what is expected. But then look at the scale. for you to know it's an epidemic, consider the scale. Epidemic affects a larger scale, like multiple communities. So when we say, let's say, number of cases in a particular country, for a particular condition, the number of cases have increased suddenly. What are the communities that the condition is occurring? Is it multiple communities? If it is multiple communities, it's an epidemic. If it is multiple districts, you can call it an epidemic. If it's an entire region, you can also call it an epidemic. But then for outbreak, it is limited to a small or a specified area, sometimes a school, sometimes a workplace, or even a village or an event. People went for a particular event or a program, and then they are getting infected by a particular disease. The condition or the spread is just limited and it's occurring among those who went for that event or among students in a particular school. Then you call that one an outbreak. Is that okay? Now, sometimes too, if you want to look at the difference, pay attention to the number of cases. For epidemic, there is usually higher number of cases, well above what is expected. In an outbreak too, the numbers will increase, but then the volumes of the case would not be that much compared to that of epidemic. Another thing you can also consider as a difference is the geographic spread. The geographic spread. Epidemic can spread across cities or regions. But for an outbreak, it is contained at one place. For example, an outbreak can occur in just one district in, let's say, Greater Accra region. Okay, so for example, let's say there is rainy season, then people are reporting with cholera from just one single district. It's an outbreak. Probably they are drinking from the same source. That is an outbreak. For epidemic, it will occur in multiple districts or cities or communities. Then that one is an epidemic. Another thing you can also look at as a way to measure or understand or distinguish between epidemic and an outbreak is the public health response that is associated. So the public health response, epidemic usually requires larger scale interventions, usually regional vaccinations, a whole community vaccination, okay, and sometimes widespread surveillance systems. But for an outbreak, you can manage outbreaks locally, localized measures. Okay, so for example, either if it's a school that the outbreak occurred, you can close down the school or isolate cases that are people who have been infected or disinfect the whole institution or the facility. Now, another measure that you can use is the duration. Okay, the duration of occurrence. Usually for an epidemic, it can last for weeks to a month, sometimes even longer than months. But for outbreak, outbreaks are typically short term. Once the source is identified, you try to control the source, the outbreak would be controlled. Okay, but for epidemic, okay, because it's occurring in multiple, cities or multiple districts, it may last very long. Is that okay? So a typical example when cholera rise across a city. Okay, so for a particular country, cholera is occurring, or we are getting more numbers of cholera than we expect in multiple cities in a particular country. Okay, measles increase across multiple districts in a particular country. That is an epidemic. Okay, but for an outbreak, food poisoning at a wedding is an outbreak. COVID-19 in one factory is an outbreak. Is that okay? Great. Food poisoning in, let's say, one nursing training college is an outbreak. Is that okay? Cholera rise across, let's say, cholera rise in one nursing training college. It's an outbreak. Or cholera increase in one senior high school. It's an outbreak. Is that okay? So know the difference between an epidemic and then an outbreak. Okay, but you can use the two words interchangeably, but they mean different things. Outbreak is usually localized. An epidemic is usually large. Okay, good. So know the difference. So if you are looking at let's say sudden increase in disease cases above what is normally expected, when you are talking of a particular region, multiple districts, multiple cities, then we are talking about epidemic. But when you are looking at a localized increase in cases, usually limited to small area or a